Voices Unbound is about breaking down barriers between the ways we talk about the environment, changing the conversation from just between scientists and politicians to being between neighbors from all around the Northwest region on the most pressing environmental challenges of our times.
The paradigm has been really to just, a chemist goes into the lab, makes his chemicals to be, to do its function, but they don't necessarily evaluate it and look at it from the health or the environmental perspective. So what we've been working on is how do we change that paradigm?
How can we actually effectuate change through green cleaning, but yet also think about the bigger picture impact?
I feel like a disc jockey right here. Welcome. Oh, I'm so excited today, you guys. We have two great guests in the studio today. We have a new student research intern with me. Everybody's joining virtually. We're post-COVID. We're mid-COVID. We're up in your arms COVID. So this is our new environment. But Doug Mackey, our engineer, has kindly allowed me to come into the studio to keep my mellifluous voice going. So big shout out to Doug, but also welcome Nancy Simcox and Aurora Martin and my student research intern, Madison Thackara. So just before we sort of get started, the title of this particular podcast is Coping with Environmental Threats, Clean Shift, Chemical Threats, and Food Trucks. Who would have thought? What a crazy, a crazy title, but a really, really important way to launch this second part of our podcast series. I'm going to introduce Nancy Simcox first because Nancy has been doing environmental work in environmental and occupational health work for around 25 years. And for the past 5, she's been serving as one of the co-directors for the Northwest Center for Occupational Health and Safety. And she does a lot of community education in Region 10, which is, it's sort of like Pacific Northwest, Alaska. It's all of this sort of big EPA region. Nancy, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the Director of Continuing Education at the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences at the University of Washington. And I'm also the lecturer in the department faculty. And for the past many years, I've been focusing my research and educational activities on chemical policy and regulations. And we do a lot of training. So we have an academic training program, which trains the next set of professionals to your occupational medicine doctors, your occupational health nurses, on how to integrate and bring together concepts of occupational health in a disciplinary way. And we also have a training center that works with people once they are graduated, they get to come out and back to the University of Washington and receive more training on safety and health and the new emerging issues that are related. And my focus has focused it on chemical safety.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nancy. And occupational health is right there at one of the epicenters of the social determinants of health, right? Because we can't choose. Sometimes wherever we work, we don't necessarily have control over what the bosses are putting inside our environments, right? So it's really at that core level of worker safety and social justice. So I'm so excited to have you here. Aurora, do you want to give us a little bit of an intro about what PopUp Justice is and what this kind of cool thing that you've been doing in your partnership?
Yes. Thank you for having me on the show. And actually, PopUp Justice is just a creative, collaborative consulting firm. It's focused on social justice kinds of projects, everything from legal social justice to public health and other kind of creative endeavors where there's an intersection of things like this project around food trucks is trying to do in terms of storytelling, in terms of public education, public health, and also kind of environmental innovation. So PopUp Justice was really kind of this idea in my head that emerged after about 20 years of working at a nonprofit legal services organization, and after kind of creating and really meeting a lot of different people from all walks of life, from university to community groups all over the state, and to also lawyers and judges and health professionals. And so when I had a chance to actually first meet Nancy, we hit it off because of this idea of creative storytelling and public education and public health and occupational health interests as well.
It's so amazing.
That's what I do.
That's so cool because it's sort of like that. With your background and experience, you can talk to, state leaders, politicians, judges, lawyers, those people that sort of like those sort of, the lofty towers, if you like, of our public discourse. But at the same time, I'm assuming that you became more aware that the interface between regular people communicating and understanding and being able to have their voice heard by those leaders needed some other sorts of different techniques for reaching them through storytelling or other things like that, right? I mean, it's sort of like It's one of those connectivity pieces where if I'm talking about something, a politician may have no way of connecting with what I'm talking about because they're not on that committee or they don't care about this topic, right? So how do you actually get gravitas and grounding? I mean, that's kind of my overall impression about what the work you've been doing. That's exciting. Yes. That's nice. So how does it work then with food trucks? Why food trucks? We need food trucks in COVID-19. We can't go inside restaurants anymore, or we can. So what happened with food trucks? Why did you guys decide to focus on food trucks?
It was, we got together, some of our group has been working together on green chemistry, the idea of having chemicals that are designed to not be toxic. And so we've been working a couple years on that. And when we met Aurora, we thought, oh my God, this would be an awesome collaboration that we can pull together to reach other communities that we haven't reached. And so Aurora worked with us to take our science and put it into the hands of more people. And her story, and I'll let Aurora speak for herself, but her story is how we started talking about food trucks. And then we the University of Washington had already worked with Food Truck Association, so we partnered with them as well.
Okay. What's the story? Yes.
The story is that I grew up here in Seattle working food trucks. The first big food trucks that came from Los Angeles in the late 70s, early 80s. My family actually went down to LA, and we thought that running a food truck would be the way to, have a slice of the American dream. Yeah. And so one food truck became 6 food trucks, and we sold hamburgers and hot dogs and Filipino food. But an early memory was that I rode from LA I-5 North to Seattle in the ice maker area. I fit really well as a 7 or 8 year old, and we all made it just fine. And it was an eventful time. But also I remember just being in that space. And when we actually, and also, we had a commissary and essentially a restaurant that the food trucks were attached to. But importantly, I know that the public health piece of cleaning standards and methodologies and all of that was important. I remember, and the smell of bleach, right, in terms of the heavy smell of bleach, not just generally. And so that was sort of an interesting memory, and some funny ones too. But fast forward to the initial meetings with Nancy and the rest of the team on the green chemistry idea of, what could be an interesting cross-section of collaboration that would actually be this bigger picture question that Earth Lab asks. And that is shifting to something that is, greener for the planet, healthier and sustainable. And so I think this idea of actually focusing on small spaces and kind of activities that are very much about community building, which is very much what I remember and what I see today around food trucks. How can we actually effectuate change through green cleaning, but yet also think about the kind of bigger picture impact, to imagine that food trucks all over the state are now a thing. It is a sector. It's a growing sector. And even in this moment, I think actually food trucks can actually help communities where they are at to build community, given the quarantine kind of status of things.
It's a nice whole circle sort of thing with that, isn't it? I mean, it's really, it connects with communities.
Well, we were hoping to combine the occupational health risks along with the food safety risks. And I think a lot of times people focus on the food safety risks a lot. And sometimes, not that we ignore, but we don't think about them as much. So the workers that are behind the counter handing you your food. And so we wanted to highlight, how do we integrate these two things? Because yes, it's really important to use these chemicals to sanitize and keep those food trucks free of pathogens, right, inside in those surfaces, right, that they're using the food on. But the workers that are handling those chemicals, we wanted to make sure also. So our project was kind of a neat fit, I think, because we're bringing different concepts together. And also the Washington State Retail Food Code rule is being updated. Okay. So it gives us all an opportunity to kind of think about this. And then when they come out with their code, we can come out with our materials. And we're also hoping to reach populations that haven't really been reached before.
So retail,
with our information.
Back up a little second. The retail food code would include use of chemicals, sanitizers, and all those other sorts of things.
Yes, the sanitizers that food workers must use. Right. And they have training they have to go through and get a certificate for.
Okay.
Our Washington State Department of Health runs the program. So we've been working with them, too. They've been great at giving us assistance, as well as Washington Department of Ecology, because they're on the environmental side.
Right.
And they've been working on the green chemistry issue.
So I remember early on, one of our early meetings in the Earth Lab group, when I think you were talking about these places that are food truck car washes, or these places that clean, these private businesses that have grown up to actually clean inside and out a food truck, right? You sort of drive the food truck up, you go sit down, and someone else cleans it all the way through. Those things exist around the state. This industry is well developed, so this is another sort of arm of that, right?
There is an arm of businesses that go around and clean the ventilation hoods of the food truck. So they go in and they actually will do that. But there are some contractors as well that can come in and clean. But we have to remember food trucks are small. Yeah. They have small budgets. And so they are a lot of it do it themselves kind of employers. And there's about 1,700 food trucks in Washington State.
Good heavens.
And our Washington State Food Truck Association only reaches about 150. So there's a lot of people that we can be reaching more.
So how did it go? How did the project go before COVID-19 came along and threw some spanners in the works?
Well, I mean, we did a lot. We actually did an electronic survey that we sent out to the Washington Food Truck Association. And then that, like I said, they were very, very busy in the fall before COVID hit. So we had a lower return than we expected. But that was okay. We got some basic information. And from that, we also tapped into our University of Washington students through one of our nutritional classes. And we had students going out into the community and interviewing some of the food trucks in their community. And we had a very short survey that we put together with all of our different partners giving us guidance. And then we also, through Aurora's connections, and she can talk about this, is with Heritage University. We decided to reach out to Yakima and take our survey and our information and get those students involved as well.
Super.
And so I'll let Aurora explain, because she was the lead on that.
Yeah, tell us about Heritage University. Not everybody knows about this cool place over there in Yakima.
Yes, Heritage University is really an incredibly special institution that I know the University of Washington has relationships with, but as you said, not a lot of people know. It is a university located in the actually Toppenish area of the lower Yakima Valley, and it really was established with the vision to serve the Yakima Nation students and families and the farm worker students and their families that have, recently actually started to develop a community there. So I apologize that we'll have to edit that. But, it's a special place because I have had a chance to work with a number of the students and the faculty there. And when this opportunity came up, we wanted to see about the statewide reach and make sure that we looked at not just the Puget Sound area, but also what are food trucks operating like and providing community in rural parts of Washington. And so we were able to actually get Heritage University students to work on this project with the team. So that has been really very exciting.
Nice. I was just thinking, is there a food truck class out there in any of the community colleges or anything else like that? Are there any sort of programs like that?
Yeah, there is actually not in the community colleges, but there is one at the University of Washington.
Nice.
And we were talking with them at Heritage about how they might be able to do a similar kind of program with appropriate funding, of course.
I love America. I love it that you can have a food truck class, and that's just so cool. That's just magic. Okay, so sort of fast forward to thinking around these chemical challenges inside the workplace. How what do you see are the sort of the looming threats now, the looming threats that were existing, but also sort of switching over to what you see as looming threats now with COVID-19 and with, I see photographs now of people spraying chemicals everywhere and doing a bunch of stuff like this. What are your thoughts now in terms of cleaning practices, and has America gone more crazy for cleaning practices now in a good way or a bad way? What's the sort of scene happening with that, Nancy, that you're aware of?
Yeah, so we have seen an uptick in exposure calls to the poison control centers, for example.
Really?
There
Okay.
was a report that came out in March highlighting the difference between January through March of this year and last year, and they followed up and tried to identify some of the issues that people were having. Because they were going out, people are using disinfectants everywhere, not necessarily using them properly, because bleach is a disinfectant, but it's not often used that way. They often use it as a cleaner. And one big principle that we're trying to express out there to everybody is to please clean first and then disinfect, because when you use a disinfectant, if it's put on a dirty surface, it's not going to do the job that you want it to do. We also want to really express that people do not mix chemicals, because you put like something with ammonia together with something like bleach and it causes a very nasty gas that people can get harmed from. So, we have been really working hard on getting information in Spanish and English right now, because that's what we've been able to do, to get fact sheets and information out to the community. And before COVID came, we were going to go out into the fields more with the farm workers and different liaisons that we have that through Aurora's network. But unfortunately, because of that, we were unable to get out there. And one of the barriers that we came up against was because folks don't have email.
Right.
So we couldn't necessarily do that. So it has to be done in person to get the information out, or through these liaisons who are going out and are essential and still working with the communities in Yakima. So that's one of the things that we've been focusing on. We did learn from them, from our survey work and our in-person interviews, some of the key things that they really wanted us to focus on. Like, they wanted to understand, like, what is a green chemical? They wanted to know how should they be using chemicals safely. So we kind of have some good guidance just from our initial pilot work that we did before COVID hit. And that's what we're going to be focusing our toolkit around.
Oh my gosh, we've gotten to this part of the interview, and I haven't asked you how you would define a green chemical. So we need to know what is a green chemical?
So a green chemical product is one that does not contain highly toxic compounds, and they're often called environmentally preferable products. And what that means is that there's been a third-party certification. The Environmental Protection Agency, for example, has put together a program, and they go in and look at all the different ingredients, and they make sure they do not cause cancer, they're not corrosive to the eyes, they're not going to cause asthma, because a lot of these disinfectants are related to asthma. Yeah. And can cause asthma, such as bleach. They've combined it with the environmental properties. So we have the health criteria, public health, as well as environment. So that's why in this cooperation we have occupational health specialists and ecologists, because we're bringing those two together to talk about these things. And at the same time, the criteria they look at are also performance-based, because a lot of complaints in the early years, because really this has been going on for almost 2 decades where we've been piloting and working on designing newer chemicals. The paradigm has been really to just a chemist goes into the lab, makes his chemicals to be, to do its function, but they don't necessarily evaluate it and look at it from the health or the environmental perspective. So what we've been working on is how do we change that paradigm? We want to change. We want to make sure that when chemicals...
Wait, hold on a second. So someone making a chemical for commercial use don't necessarily look at the health or the safety side of it?
No, they don't necessarily have to do that. And so they're not trained in toxicology, for example. They're not trained in occupational health principles. And so one of the biggest things we've been working on in the past, and that's why we have the green chemistry field now, is there's been a group of scientists who've said we need to have this kind of science so that we can start training our chemists so they know how to do this. And so there's been a good response of academics, government, public sector, private sector. They're all coming together to formulate and create new chemicals.
So you're saying a good response. Are you getting pushback from industry at all? Are you getting, or are they sort of on
initially,
board?
But I think now I'm seeing a shift. I'm seeing things are changing so that people are starting to using safer chemicals, but it's a very slow process. As you know, government is very slow at making the regulatory changes that are needed. We just updated our toxic chemical policies in 2016.
Wow.
Europe did about 10 years before us, trying to kind of use more of a precautionary principle. So in the past, if a chemical turned up to be having harmful impacts, they pretty much just were allowed to continue to be used, or they got replaced with something else that we didn't really maybe know very much about. And so we're trying to change that. If things are not guaranteed as safe, which is what was in the past kind of the thinking.
Aurora, can you help us understand the precautionary principle in terms of that? Or like how do you explain the precautionary principle to people in food trucks?
Well, I mean, how we have tried to actually discuss the implications of the kind of current practices and what we are urging for people to adopt is like, how does it feel? How does it feel to actually, on a practical level, to your health? And we started to actually think about it as you're in an enclosed space. And in places, for example, like Yakima, where we understand asthma is very high, the incidence of asthma is very high, and pollution and heat also kind of contribute and exacerbate that. When you're in an enclosed space and there's a lot of activity and you're actually having to make sure that things are clean. And in this moment of COVID, you have to make sure that it's not just clean, but it's also safe. And so when we imagined that and when we were talking to people, we wanted to actually start out with those questions. And that's the reason why these green cleaning alternatives are actually safer for health, and safer for just kind of like, especially in these kind of small spaces, it makes you feel less toxic.
Right.
I love that.
I love that. I love the idea that, if you actually ask people, I once had a conversation with school custodians and asked them what aisle they hated to walk down in the supermarket, and everybody said the cleaning products aisle, right? Because everybody knows you can't breathe when you walk down that aisle. So I love that in terms of just making it really real for people. We've got to make it real for our listeners, because I know they're dying for us to get to more of these postcards that we collected around the sound to see how people are talking about chemicals. So Madison's been able to pick through some of the cards that we've been looking at. Obviously, we have a data set of about 1,083 cards. So we have a ton of cards to look at, but we've just sort of picked a quick selection here for us. Madison is our... she's doing a great job. This is her first time on the podcast, everybody. But she's going to be our zip code queen. All right. So when you call out a zip code, Madison will have it, and then read out what the environmental challenge is. But we really want to sort of drill down on how people are coping with or surviving the challenges. So, Aurora and Nancy, do you have a particular postcard you'd like to read out from the grab bag?
I have the this one that says, what environmental challenges are most important to you? And it says garbage, water waste as the answer.
What zip code are they from there, Nancy?
Oh, what's the code? 98422.
And what zip code is that from, Madison?
98422. That's Tacoma, city of Tacoma, and the county of Pierce County.
Right on.
So,
thank you.
Yes.
And the thing that I liked was the challenge is, how are you coping? And she wrote, tolerating, teaching my kids, give a hoot, don't pollute. And so what I like about it is, I love that she had a slogan, because we're into slogans, and it catches people's attention, is that in our work, we want to design chemicals so that if they are released and they are out there, they're safer, they can biodegrade, they're not going to cause harm. So that one I thought was a good one.
That's lovely. And it's sort of a harbinger from years back, right? Give a hoot, don't pollute. That was from, like, you know, the don't litter the highway kind of a thing. You know, it was
right.
way back. That's lovely. Thank you. Aurora, did you find your postcard?
Yes. The zip code is 98402.
Which is where, Madison?
98402. That is also Tacoma. Shout out to Tacoma.
Shout out to
Pierce
Tacoma.
County again.
Right on.
Yeah.
This is a T-Town show.
That's awesome. The response to the question of what environmental challenges are most important to you, this person says transitioning people away from fossil fuels, conserving farmland, and redlining chemicals in farming and landscapes. And how they're coping with it is like pretty active. It says voting, attending meetings and lectures, and discussing these topics with others. And I think for me, it is just exactly the kind of sort of connection between the sort of everyday living, sort of experience to the practical and policy approaches that people really can be engaged in terms of the bigger picture of, equitable and sustainable futures. So this postcard really resonated with me as somebody who is saying, you know what, every day I see this is what I actually believe in, and this is how I am going to engage in that kind of change.
That's fantastic. And they had, they mentioned, did they say redlining or how do they talk about chemicals in the farms again?
I believe it's transitioning people away from fossil fuels, conserving farmland. Maybe it's reducing chemicals in farming and landscapes.
Right. So that's interesting because it's sort of like people have. I like the idea of green chemicals because it gives people a choice, right? I don't think people acknowledge that they have to use chemicals, but they're very uncomfortable with the use of chemicals. I mean, Nancy, I don't know how many you know about what sort of research being done in sort of human behavior or farm worker behavior or farming behavior in terms of how the use of chemicals on the farms and whether that's been changing over time.
Well, pesticide use is one of the key chemicals that it's used on the farms, right. And they have changed in some ways as far as their level of toxicities. And we've used to have these acute outbreaks where people would get poisoned if they were working in the fields, right. For example, from the occupational end of it. And what's happened now is we don't see that as much now in this area, this region. They've adjusted the toxicity, but we do have concerns of long-term kind of chronic cancer, reproductive, and other health problems that can bring on to communities.
So that's what I don't see in these postcards. I don't see necessarily people talking about human health from this. I think of them thinking about it as pollution, which might be human health created, but not necessarily, right? They're sort of like they're moving around this idea that chemicals cause pollution, but we then we have some actions for that, which is sort of like getting political. My postcard is from the 98329 area. Where's that postcard from, Madison?
98329, that is from Gig Harbor and Pierce County.
All right, we moved out of Tacoma, but we're still in Pierce County. Right. Because we collected all of our postcards maybe around here, funnily enough. It said pollution, limiting environmental challenge, not just factory output, but education, private landowners to limit the use of chemicals. And then coping or surviving with these challenges, I manage me. In inverted commas, and my farm, and try to educate customers about my practices and why they are important to me. So that's really kind of going into this idea that as a business person, you can educate consumers, customers about this, and that's actually a way to start changing the narrative, to start changing the discourse. I'm wondering in the food truck world whether, because you've got those many thousands, hundreds of food trucks out there that aren't really linked to the statewide organization. So how are they passing on practices to their consumers, their customers? I'm just, wondering about the possibilities going forward for where you perhaps want to take the food truck work if you had a crystal ball for the future. Nancy, where do you think?
I see that one thing that COVID has done is it has brought all of it to the top. Yeah. Like, we're all thinking about it now. They're clued in that we don't have to do that. Like, before we would have done a lot of work just trying to explain why chemicals are important. And now I think people are using them a lot more, that they see that difference and they see why it's important. Our crystal ball is, we really do want to keep working with the communities. And I do like the idea and the approaches that we have started. And we need to keep continuing them between our student populations going out into the community, talking with the truck operators, and them actually being able to say to their audiences, which they've done. Now they have an app now that the Washington State Food Truck Association has an app if you want to look where they are, what time they're open, what community they're in. So those kinds of things I think are cool tools that people can use to start feeling safer. But yeah, I think that's... It's a route towards educating people about chemicals. That's my big realization from today's podcast, is that if we do this sort of empowerment education work through storytelling, through reaching people at the ground level, through reaching communities that serve communities, that build communities. There's a food truck community out there, everybody. You've got your local food truck in your local place. It's a community center. And it's the new community center in COVID-19 because you're standing outside all the time, wearing a mask and no one can hear you, right? So this is like maybe our new opportunity for discourse and for change. And thanks so much, Nancy, for reminding me that, we're talking about chemicals. People are beginning to be more aware about chemicals. And Aurora, for making this more visceral, right? Thinking about you riding in the truck all the way back up to Seattle to start your family's business to help grow the community for Filipino food, for other food. I just think that's superb. I've been leaving Madison out of the conversation, but Madison, do you have any comments for the good of the order in terms of what you've been hearing today, and any thoughts?
I think you guys, it's a great conversation, and I do think that it was, when I was going through the postcards, it was interesting to see not a lot of people talking or naming chemicals as a challenge, but it seemed like they could identify the impacts that chemicals might have been responsible for in how they were coping, just staying inside or, avoiding certain things. It was very interesting to see that kind of almost disconnect in identifying chemicals as a problem, but being able to identify their effects in other ways, maybe more environmental ways, not necessarily personal health.
They are everywhere.
Very interesting.
No one listening to this podcast will look at food trucks the same again. Nancy Simcox and Aurora Martin, thank you so much for being our guests on the relaunch of podcast series number 2. And thanks so much, Madison, for curating our cards for today. And thanks, Doug, for being just a super all-round engineer. This has been another fine episode of Enviro Amplify. Tune in again. We've got another 3 or 4 coming up. So look forward to hearing from us later. Bye-bye. Earth Lab is grounded in the urban serving ethic of our land-grant university. Go Huskies, and advances our commitment to community and our commitment to bringing people of different backgrounds together to solve our most complex and critical environmental challenges.